Welcome back to another edition of Wake in the Red Weekly presented by Footy Talks. My name is Michael Singh, and as usual, we've got a ton to get to on today's show. If you guys are watching, you'll notice I got a new setup in my room, a new background, taking us back to BMO Field because we are nostalgic there, so going to give you what we can. But this whole setup actually, it cost us. As you can tell, we're down Mitchell Tierney. We no longer can afford Mitch's high salary because of the setup. So that's kind of the offset there. Jeff, what are your thoughts? How you doing, man?
Well, you spoiled my joke. I was gonna say Mike gets one dose and he's already back at BMO, like we want to be. So, no, looking good, buddy. Looking good. You got your Leafs hat on. We can put you. That green screen is going to come in handy when it's time to redo the opening of the Michael Singh injury report. So, long may it rain.
Jeff's mind's already racing. He's coming up with a bunch of ideas.
I got ideas, man. That's me.
Yeah, there you go. On today's show, obviously, we're going to be joined by Ben Steiner, who is our Tron FC 2 beat reporter. And if you guys caught any of his work so far on Wake in the Red, he's done some great stuff for us. So really excited to chat with him. We'll chat some top prospects. We'll chat TFC2's kind of new philosophy and the return of the Young Reds. So we'll get into a little bit that a little bit more later on in the show. Before we start, it is the 1 year anniversary of the death of George Floyd. Of course, he was murdered by Minneapolis police. And I think, today's a good day to bring that back up because, of course, it is the 1 year anniversary. And we've had conversations about, that space on our show, about, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we are making strides towards making this world a better place in general.
Mm-hmm.
And today's a good reminder of that. This is 1 year ago where a lot of the outcry sort of started, and there has been a lot of positive that have come about it. But
so
there's
much.
Still a lot of work that needs to be done. So just wanted to get the show started off on sort of that note. But let's move on. Let's talk about some Tron FC. Jeff, we were on the post game show.
Yes, we were
on Twitter Spaces. If you guys haven't caught it yet, we host a kind of 30-minute, an hour post game show on Twitter Spaces where we have you guys call in, take some calls, and hear what you guys have to say and sort of create some banter, some back and forth conversation there.
Yep. Don't do disservice to the pregame show as well, which Mike Newell does an excellent job hosting for us. Love the Twitter Spaces. It's fantastic. I've always wanted to be on a call-in radio show, so it's really fulfilling a need for me spiritually. I super dig it. And Will Dunn piping in with the first comment of the day, and he says the only TFC related words we need is see. Did he say here? We need this week, so he didn't specify see or here, which is good. Pause in full training.
Yeah, we'll get to that, man.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Will. But let's talk a little bit about that match this weekend. Obviously, TFC losing 1-0 to Orlando City. Jeff, have your thoughts sort of shifted a little bit or changed at all from our post game show, or are you still feeling kind of the same way?
No, time heals all wounds, so I don't think I'm as scorching hot magma as I was. But yeah, no, I still feel the same way. It's just more of a dull thud now, as opposed to like a tinnitus in my ears ringing away, making me mental.
What were your thoughts on the game?
What did I say that set you off? It was a shambolic mess. I think my thoughts are still there, man. My one takeaway with the benefit of time now is that, the thing that really bothered me was how hesitant some players were. Richie Larea being the prime example. I'm not ready to call it a regression yet, but I don't like him being ponderous on the ball when he's making those blistering runs down the flank. And I think that may be indicative of the disconnect between his natural tendencies and the system that they're trying to instigate. And so I'm going to be looking out for that in the future.
Mm-hmm. That was a point you made. And I kind of made the counterpoint to that. And that was, I think that just...
He's growing as a player, yeah.
Yeah, of Richard Larea growing as a player. He's reading different kind of avenues, different lanes. But circling back to TFC as a whole there in that match, I didn't think they played that poorly. I thought the result, the 1-0 result, didn't really reflect the overall feel of that game. there are
Okay.
still clearly very like problems that are very evident in this TFC team, like the fact that they can get beat with one ball easily too often. And
Hmm.
that's a problem. That they can't
Oh
be
yeah.
that easy for an opposition to break down your defense with just one pass. But overall, the feel of the game, I felt like TFC were kind of taking it to Orlando more often than not, and that could be as a result of Orlando getting that early goal of Tesho Akindele. But I
Hmm.
thought TFC looked a little bit more dangerous than Orlando did on the night. Orlando did have the better chances overall, minus maybe that Jacob Schaffelberg howler that he missed. But I still do think TFC dictated the tempo of that match, and there were some positives still to take away from that match.
Would a counter argument be that once Orlando got the goal, they were happy to cede possession to TFC's shambolic nonsense, and as long as they covered Jefferson, they didn't have to worry about anything.
Yeah, I mean, no, that's a fair counter argument. Like I said, if that could be a result of Orlando getting that first early goal, and
Hmm.
then sort of sitting back and allowing TFC to kind of dictate the play. But again, it's an early goal, so you still have to be in the balance of the game. You still have to be there competing for the rest of
Yeah.
the 90 minutes.
Hmm.
And I think TFC did a good job of sort of bouncing back. They were missing that final pass, which I mean we talked about a bunch.
Yeah.
That's Alejandro Pazuello more often than not. So we're excited to see what he looks like looking up with Jefferson Sotaldo. But it's not a good result. Like you those are games you want to win. If
Hmm.
especially with Pato and Nani out, those are games you kind of have to win if you want to be supporter shield contenders.
I think
So
that ship has sailed. I don't think we're supporter shield contenders at this point. Ivan brings up a really interesting point, and call me crazy, but it seems like previous TFC teams had the confidence and motivation to come back when they were down a goal. Haven't seen that this year. Immediately, I'm thinking that's because we haven't gone down 1-0 in the first 5 minutes, which was a big problem last season. And I would argue maybe even the season before that, the last 2 years of Vanny, how many times did we concede a goal before everybody got into their seats yet from the the queues for snacks back when the world was normal? I don't know if that's a fair comparison, Ivan. I usually agree with you, but it's a different team, it's a different system, and they're not going down that early. So I don't know. What's your take on that, Mike?
yeah, I mean I personally thought they showed a lot of fight and a lot of battle in Saturday's game against Orlando. There wasn't that end product. There wasn't that finish. They came back against who was it? New York City FC. The
Mm-hmm.
last game before that, where they scored a late equalizer, right? I
Yep.
mean, this is a team I don't think right now, 'cause aside from that New York Red Bulls match, the will or the willingness to kind of be up for the fight, that's not a question mark for me right now. A
Okay.
lot of it right now comes down to tactics, comes down to player usage, and are you doing what you can to get the best out of your players? I said this on
That's
our
it.
post game show,
Yeah. Yeah.
but a problem for me right now is Chris Armas, of late at least, is trying to get his best 11 on the field, but he's not necessarily putting his best 11 in the best positions to succeed. And two cases of that is the RO Jr. in the middle of the park. You want to
Mm-hmm.
get RO, Richie Laray, and Kamar Lawrence all into the game. But are we really setting this team up to succeed if RO Jr. is playing central midfield?
Mm-hmm.
Are there better options for it? Like we talked about so often about how crowded that center of the park is for Toronto FC. And for me, it's kind of weird to see RO
Yep.
Jr. play center of the park because they
Yeah,
have so
jumping
many
up the
other
depth
options.
chart when there's a million guys on the bench. I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I loved what you said as a when you recounted what Armas said, which was he didn't want to burn a sub, uh, but that's public knowledge now. So it was very surprising that he rolled that again in a game
Yeah,
because
especially because Jonathan Osorio was back, right?
mhm,
I can understand when you don't have Mark Delgado, you don't have Jonathan Osorio. I can understand slotting RO there into the middle of the park. It makes sense at that point.
sure,
But when you have both of those guys in your starting 11, Jonathan Osorio is going to play the number 10 because Paz is out, so that's fine. But Mark Delgado on the right wing again? What more do we have to see from Mark Delgado on the right wing to know that it's not working out.
Absolutely zero more attempts. I
We've seen
think.
for years here at this club how Mark Delgado can succeed, not just succeed, be amazing in
Yeah,
the middle of the park there for Tron FC with all of the work that he does. And we talk
absolutely.
about TFC being a pressing team, about a team that gets after people, sticks their foot in for a tackle. That's been Mark Delgado's identity for years for this club. And right now he's not being put in a position to succeed. There are other
Yep.
options you have there on your bench that you could have played at right wing, at right midfield, but
Hmm.
I don't know, man. I don't know. Nico's
Yep.
commenting here in the chat is I would have put Sotaldo as or Cam and put Ozo on the wing, Aru in the middle. It has been great so far. I mean, like he hasn't been bad. I even tweeted that out. I don't think Aru's been bad in the middle of the park, but I think it's not setting up the other players for success.
Yeah.
Like I said,
Yeah.
a Mark Delgado. He's
Hmm.
become the person who has had to vacate his center of the park position because Aro's going to be playing there as central midfield.
Yep.
I don't think Aro's been bad again, but he doesn't come with a lot of high expectations there in the middle of the park. You don't really rate him the same as you would rate a central midfielder. You kind of understand that he is a fullback playing center mid, and you're kind of judging off that. At least I am.
I am too. Absolutely.
Right? And
Absolutely.
I don't expect him to do all the work that a central midfielder does. But as a fullback playing center mid, I think he's done outstanding. I just think there
Yep.
are better options you can kind of throw there
100%.
at central midfield. Let's move on quickly. And
Sure.
two other positives that were from that match that I want to quickly talk about was Kamar Lawrence and Jefferson Sotaldo. Let's start with Jefferson. Jeff, what did you make of Jefferson's performance?
I feel bad for the guy because, and I said this on the post game show, he's got a lot riding on his shoulders right now, and not a lot of it makes sense. I don't like that he's now the Seba. Just get the ball to Jefferson and hope for a measure of individual brilliance. It's not necessarily fair, and it's not playing to his skill set because he's not a finisher. I mean, he might be a finisher in MLS because the level is that much lower, but he is used to playing that final ball for somebody else. I feel bad for him because he needs to break the deadlock. He needs to score a goal to get the albatross off his back. And I also don't like how we're treating him like he came in injured. This whole conditioning him. If anything, did we condition pause when he came off the back of an entire Belgian season? We didn't. I mean, Jeff played number 10 for Santos, and it hasn't been that long since he was wearing a Santos shirt. So getting him acclimated, it's not making a lot of sense to me. And then it starts raising questions about stubbornness in the coaching staff or the medical staff, stubbornness from the player. These are questions I don't want to have to ask. So that bothers me a little bit.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. I was kind of scratching my head a little bit why we are easing Jefferson Soteldo into the lineup, I guess, because as you said, he was coming off a full season. This is a guy who played a full 90 not that long ago.
Exactly.
Like the first match, I can understand. The second match, okay. But by the third match came around, I'm asking why can't we go the full 90 now? Is that because maybe there was 2 matches in the same week? Whatever the reason was. But positive news is I think last match was the first time we did see Jefferson Soteldo go the full 90. So that's kind of he has that under his belt now. I think moving forward, Jefferson Soteldo won't be really coming off this field.
Did you see Ivan's message? Let's hope he's okay, as he just posted on his Instagram story, getting treatment on his knee with prayer emojis.
I haven't seen that yet, but back to what Jefferson was sort of doing in that match. I mean, I think we all witnessed it. He was the best player on the field for Tron FC.
His hustle was pretty fantastic.
Hustle, but also his 1v1 ability.
Oh my
God. His ability to take players on and beat players off the dribble, like that's such a talent, especially in this modern day football. Like it's becoming a harder and harder skill to kind of do because the game's evolving, the game's growing, and Jefferson Soteldo still seems to be able to find those spaces in behind, beat people off the dribble. There's one play where he got the ball on the left wing, and he was 1v1 against his defender. And I think he faked him inside, faked him
Yeah,
outside,
it was
faked him back
beautiful.
inside, put the
It was
ball around
beautiful.
him, and then
Yeah.
was gone. And I think more times often than not, we are seeing Jefferson Sotaldo, when he does take somebody on 1v1, he's succeeding.
Yep.
So now it's about what's next. How do we capitalize on those opportunities? And, you know, some of that comes down to their striker play.
Yep.
Which is something that we can kind of get into a bit. But
Ben's here,
some of
though.
that also, okay, cool. And some of
Yeah.
that also comes down to, you know, missing that number 10, that final pass and pause, because
Yep.
that would usually be where Jefferson Sotaldo beats a guy and the guy he lays the ball off to, instead of it being, you know, a Michael Bradley or something like that. That's an Alejandro Pozuelo. And we
Yep.
know what Paz can do when he has the ball at his speed, especially in space. So
Absolutely.
we're excited to see how that sort of works out. But before we
we're also excited for this.
Yeah, let's go.
Talk about hustle. Here comes Mr. Hustle.
There you go. We're gonna bring on TFC2 beat writer for Wake in the Red, Ben Steiner. Ben, thanks for joining us, man. How you doing?
More than happy to be joining you guys. A little bit earlier for me, 9:30 in the morning here on the West Coast, where I am.
You're on the West Coast, eh?
Yeah, came back for a little while. Originally from Vancouver, but more than happy to hop on, and I pretty much still operate on East Coast time.
Oh man, we appreciate you. We
appreciate you. So now we're just going to ask you math questions, if that's all right. So get your get your abacus and your slide rule out, and hopefully you're awake enough. Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, so as I kind of mentioned off the top there, Tron FC 2 making the return to action for the first time in 595 days.
Mm-hmm.
Their season was called to a halt last year because of pandemic-related issues, traveling issues. So the Young Reds were in inaction last season. It was a full year off. That obviously affected some of the prospects and some of their development. TFC did do a great job of managing that. They sent out quite a few players on loan. But, we're back, and this is huge for TFC's development. Now, my question here is, what a lot of people don't really know or understand or even recognize is that when a new coach comes into the mix, in this case, Chris Armas, there's a ripple down effect. It changes the way that not only your first team plays, but also the way that your academy plays. In that first game there, Ben, was that kind of recognizable there? That shift in philosophy? Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's a little early to really tell what Toronto FC2 really is so far. In that first game, while they looked good, they won 2-1 against North Texas. There was still some areas where they didn't completely look flushed out. They still looked like a team that sort of was just 11 guys who had gotten together. By the time they played their first game, they'd only had 8 training sessions after, and that was Mike Munoz who told me that earlier this week. And so they really hadn't had time to gel as a team, but they're all decent players and decent prospects in their own right. So they had that opportunity to come together and sort of almost a formal training session by playing North Texas, even though there was 3 points in the line and they did pick that up. So I think it's a little early to really tell whether there is a trickle-down effect from Chris Armas at the top, but there is that in sort of who was playing that game and the roster build-up. It's a young roster. There's guys as young as 16 years old, born in 2004 on this TFC2 roster. So you look at that, and that's pretty similar on Mike Munoz's TFC2 team to Chris Armas's first team, because Chris Armas has not been scared to play the kids. Just look at the likes of Ralph Perusa playing the midfield, Jacob Schaffelberg on the wing, and it's a very similar situation with TFC2. Now, in terms of tactically, it's still early to tell, but TFC2 are planning to play in a similar way as the first team. But as we've seen with the first team so far, that's not necessarily been a way that's been working. So it'll be a bit of a balancing act for head coach Mike Munoz about balancing sort of having a winning style, which might not be the style that the first team is using, but also developing players in that style to eventually use in the first team, which I know is something we'll touch on later.
Tell us about Mike Munoz. You've obviously interviewed him, so maybe some impressions about the guy, but also a bit of his origin story. I mean, where is he coming from? What's his background? And does he remind you in any way of Armas Ball Z, which is, I've been trying to get Armas Ball Z into conversation because it seems the WTR thread has named his system that. So I'm going to will it into the common vernacular.
Yeah, well, Mike Munoz has a decent coaching record. He's been with the LA Galaxy for a little while. He was the LA Galaxy 2 for a little while as well as their head coach. And he was successful with them, not overly successful, but certainly decent. And he has a bit of a history in developing players in the LA Galaxy system through the academy and then the USL and now onto the first team. And now he comes to Toronto, and he was with Toronto in early 2020, planning to lead them into the 2020 season, and he never got to do that. So he's not a guy who was brought in by Chris Armas. He wasn't a guy who was brought in to sort of have that style all the way through the club, but he was a new guy brought in because they needed a new coach. And so they did that. Interestingly, Michael Rabaska, who was the coach of TFC2, went to the LA Galaxy. So it was almost like a bit of a swap unofficially. But Munoz, I think he's a pleasant guy to talk to. Very good answers. I know that there's some coaches who will give you a bit of a yes or no answer. I don't really know Chris Armas all that well, but Mike Munoz was giving fantastic answers when I spoke to him last week. And it seems like he really knows how to operate a USL2 team because a lot of the interesting thing about the USL is you have teams that are there to win it. They're the sole franchise of that club. And then you also have development teams, whether that's New England Revolution 2, Toronto FC 2, or in the case of Seattle, Tacoma Defiance, where they go by a different name. But those teams are there to develop players for an eventual MLS team. So there's different philosophies throughout the league. And I think the thing with Munoz, what he learned not only with the LA Galaxy Academy, but also with their 2 team, is how to manage up and how to manage that team that's looking for results, but also looking for development.
Just a quick follow-up. LA Galaxy 2 play in USL League 2, or do they play in the championship one level up? I'm not sure.
Yeah, they play in the championship one level up, but it's a very similar structure by developing players just at the USL level, where it's whether it's USL League 1, where Toronto FC 2 is, or LA Galaxy 2.
Okay, yeah. I said USL League 2 because it's so confusing. I'm sorry about
that. it is fairly confusing. USL League 2 is what used to be the PDL. So right. I think the North Bay Chill are in the USL PDL or USL League 2 now. They've got one of the better logos in Canadian soccer, maybe even world soccer, with a polar bear grabbing a soccer ball. But
wow, that's a bold statement.
We don't have to get into USL League 2.
Yeah, I was mentioning there that Mike Munoz is sort of a Greg Vanney hire. And it was really interesting because when Greg Vanney departed Tron FC, there was quite a few faces that went to LA Galaxy. And one of the faces that, perhaps surprisingly, perhaps not, that stuck around was Mike Munoz. So I'm really interested to see how he adapts his system to be sort of like Chris Armas' system. Because, like I said there, I think Mike Munoz even talked about this, is that those guys have to work in sort of sync. They have to be, on the same page so that when a player does graduate from the TFC Academy to the first team, they understand the type of football that they want to play. I know that was something that was very important to Greg Vanney. I think it's also very important to Chris Armas. So something to look out for there. But I want to kind of ask you is kind of general question is just how important is this TFC2 team going to be to TFC this year? Because last season they didn't have TFC2. And I think that kind of hindered some of their team's development. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's critical. Having a USL team or some sort of farm team that's a step from the academy all the way up to the MLS team and have that middle step where players can develop, I think is a critical step in MLS teams' player development. You look at, example, the Vancouver Whitecaps. They had Whitecaps 2, or CF Montreal. They had FC Montreal. They had that stepping stone for players to come up. Alphonso Davies played with Whitecaps 2 before he made his first team debut, and look what he's doing now. And so having that step to get used to playing against men, get used to playing in a professional atmosphere, it's critical to making an impact in MLS eventually down the road. And TFC have seen that. I think it's something like 17 players on the current MLS roster have spent time with TFC2. The thing this year is TFC2 isn't in Canada, and for the start of the year, they're not near the first team. So right now, TFC2, in terms of a development model, it's good, but it's not where it could be. It's really a sole club right now because they're in Casa Grande, Arizona. they don't really have that option to send players up and down too easily. And so right now it's a bit of a skeleton crew for TFC2. The player development is going to be sort of more longer term rather than sort of sending a guy down for a game to get some minutes, get some fitness. But when the team relocates to Kissimmee, Florida, then they'll have that opportunity to send players up, send players down, and use TFC2 sort of as they normally would playing in Toronto. It's going to be different this year, though, right? Because the TFC Academy is still in Toronto. They're not playing right now with government restrictions. And so you can't call a guy up to send him down to Florida too easily, because when he comes back to Canada, he'll have to quarantine for 2 weeks. And what does that do to his fitness? What does that do to his progression? So there's a whole bunch of issues like that. So it's still an important place for TFC to have and a TFC2 to be playing this year, but it won't be as good as it would be sort of in other years when everything's in Canada and COVID doesn't exist, and everything would just work a lot smoother.
Right. They are moving over to Florida, to Kissimmee, right there in the middle
Kissimmee.
of June. And that's about a 30-minute drive from Orlando. So perhaps that's where we'll see more of the team integrate. I think you mentioned that. So excited to see that, Jeff.
They'll actually be living at the same. They'll be living at the same complex as the first team is when they go over to Florida. So they'll be right integrated with a lot of the first team activities, a lot of the first team video sessions and things like that. And so that sort of line of communication, cooperation between Munoz and Armas is going to be even more open. And I'm sure that we'll see more players go up and down. I know one player that we'll certainly see come down to TFC2 is Brogan Angbers, who is a goalkeeper signed before the season. He's on a USL deal, but currently he's already in Florida and he won't be with the team until they go to Florida and he joins them there. So we will see a lot more roster movement and sort of cooperation when the two teams are in Florida, because they'll be living right next to each other.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. Quick follow-up. There's got to be some benefits to this weirdo. Like, I mean, Mike at least gets some time with his guys to sort of foster relationships outside of the pressures from the first team. There has to be a glass half full kind of perspective on them being in Arizona right now. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think you look at their setup in Arizona and they're basically at an MLS preseason camp. There's nothing else you can do than play soccer in the desert. I don't know if our listeners have seen photos of this place in Casa Grande, but it is patches of green in a desert. There's nothing around it. It is just soccer fields and just a hotel. So they really have nothing else to focus on than playing soccer, training, and getting to know each other. So that's definitely a positive for a short while. I think eventually, as we saw sort of with the NHL bubble, the MLS bubble and stuff, it can get quite isolating if they were there for too long. But moving down to Florida, where COVID restrictions don't exist, they'll be able to bond as a team in Arizona and then move to Florida, and that'll work out fairly nicely. But it's not a situation that you'd want to be in for the entire season in Arizona.
No, sir. No, sir. Who do you think is most ready to make the jump to the first team?
Temi Antonoglu. It's a tongue twister of a name, but
he
was fantastic on the first week of the season. He's a left back, and he's been just stunning. He played 90 minutes of fantastic soccer on the weekend. The second goal he scored by Garrett Mclaughlin was just off a beautiful cross in from Antonoglu, and he was solid defensively. 17 successful passes on the match as well. Just overall a fantastic player, and I think he's probably ready for the first team. I know Mike sort of pointed him out a while ago on Twitter that he might be ready for the first team, and I think he's probably ready for that. If you look at the first team, though, I don't really see much of a place with him at fullback right now. And of course, being in Arizona, he's not going to move up too easily. But maybe when they're in Florida, he gets a chance at the first team.
Can he play anything but left back?
He can definitely get up the pitch. On the weekend, he only played left back, but I think he can pretty well slide in at left midfield. And being as young as he is, pretty sure he's still in his teen years. He can definitely adapt to different situations.
I like him already.
Yeah,
I like him already.
He can play left wing back as well, but I personally, I think he's a really good modern day fullback. I think he has some growing to do physically to get ready for the MLS game. But in terms of mentally, in terms of thinking the game, this guy is a baller. I'm excited to see where he kind of develops, and he's someone to kind of keep a lookout for, because there is some competition there at that left back spot in terms of TFC prospects, because another one coming through the ranks that the club really likes and is really high on, that's Luca Petras. So it'll be interesting to see if those two eventually kind of battle it out for that first team spot. What can you tell us about Luca, Ben?
Well, Luca Petras is one of the guys who has experience on TFC2. I think this is his 5th season with the team dubbed the Young Reds, and he was decent on the weekend. I don't think he did anything really exceptional, but of course, it's just 90 minutes of soccer. You can't really judge too much off that. Sure, you can jump to conclusions because that's what we do, but you can't judge too much off 90 minutes of play. Petrasso, he's a good player. He's established himself in the TFC system through not only Vanny and starting to do it through Armas and Munoz now. But I didn't see much on the weekend. He's a good player. But right now, just based on one game of form, I would give Antonoglu the nod for a first team call-up.
Wow. It'll be interesting to see for sure. All right. So we have also someone who's kind of untouted right now, and a USL League One Player of the Week, scoring both of Tron FC2's goals, their first goals in over 595 days. What can you tell TFC fans about Garrett Mclaughlin?
Well, Garrett Mclaughlin sort of came out of nowhere. He's sort of your classic USL almost journeyman. When he signed, I at first thought that he was sort of mid-20s, late 20s, maybe even early 30s, because just of where he's played in his track record. Came from the NCAA, was a successful goal scorer with Southern Methodist University, or SMU for short. Was the 8th overall selection by the Houston Dynamo in the MLS Super Draft a couple of years ago. Went on to play for their...
last year, not even like a couple years ago. This is a guy who, 8th overall, he has some potential to him, doesn't he?
He certainly has some potential to him. He didn't light the world on fire when he was with the Rio Grande Valley Toros. But he certainly did it in his first week in the nice TFC2 hoops. So we'll see whether he can make much progress in the new system that he's in. But he certainly made a good first impression. He linked up well. The thing I'm worried about, at least for the immediacy, is how are his legs going to hold up? Because right now he is the only striker on the roster on a professional contract. Behind him is Hugo Mbong, Ralph Priso's brother. He's 16 years old. He's not exactly an option to start too many games. And so you're playing 2 games a week for the first 6 weeks of the season. I've got a feeling that Garrett McLaughlin's going to get quite tired if they don't add a new striker soon. But he certainly did fantastic in the first game of the season. Sure, he scored a penalty. You have to score those. But his second goal was just a beautiful finish.
I've got a solution to that problem, and his name is Jordan Perusa. What I've been told is that his loan is actually like an 8 or 9 game loan to San Antonio FC. And following his loan, he's expected to join that TFC2 club. So keep an eye on that, because TFC2 strikers between Mclaughlin and Perusa, that's a real threat there in USL. And if that is indeed the case and Perusa does join that side, watch out.
But I thought you were going to say Tsubasa Endo, actually. But
it's not very often, though. Like, you see an 8th overall MLS Super Draft pick the very next year go down to the USL. I mean, this is the guy who, if you're drafted 8th overall, you're probably expected to sort of compete for an MLS roster spot. So I was really surprised to see TFC2 pick him up. I think it's a fantastic pickup. And I think he's actually, if he does really, really well, he could make a case for himself to, potentially earn a first team contract. Maybe not with TFC, maybe with TFC, but with another club down the line. So this is a very good showcase opportunity, especially as he is one of the only strikers on the roster. So great shout there. I'm interested to see how he kind of progresses. Jeff, one final question there you have for Ben?
It's a double question, but why do they call them the Young Reds if they're guys on the roster that are potentially older than the young guys on the TFC first team roster? I mean, it could be a pejorative term for guys on your roster. Why do you think they do that?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I wasn't calling him that until I saw our colleague James Rossi put it in his season preview on the Toronto FC website. So I saw that and I sort of picked it up, but I'm not sure exactly where it came from or why they called him that, because you're right. They had a 34-year-old netminder in that on Saturday. So not exactly the young Reds there. And then Luca Petras was 20 years old. So when you have an 18-year-old playing the midfield on the first team, it's a little counterintuitive to be calling the second team the young Reds. I know that when the Whitecaps had their farm team, they were known as the Thundercaps because they played at UBC's Thunderbird Stadium. So maybe we could think of a bit of a new name for TFC2 rather than the Young Reds, but nothing's really come to mind yet. Maybe the Hoops, because they do have those. Yeah,
maybe the Hoops. And that's a perfect segue. How do I get one of those kits, and why can't I order them? What is going on here?
Well, that I don't know. You'll probably have to ask a guy more inside TFC and TFC2. There's some
Which will
USL
be you
teams,
in like 2 weeks. So
there's some teams that do sell USL jerseys. I mean, the Las Vegas Lights, they sell their jerseys, and those are some of the best in all of soccer. USL League Two teams include Forward Madison, again, some of the best jerseys in all of soccer around the world. But I've found a hard time finding jerseys for the two teams and the sort of dedicated MLS farm teams, because often they wear the jersey of their first team just with a different patch. Now, I've been very interested to see that TFC2 doesn't do that. They actually have a better jersey than the first team.
But it's nice.
It would be great to be able to buy one, but apparently you can't.
Damn.
That's all right. Hopefully we can soon. I know Eric G is interested in that as well. I thought I saw him tweet that out. So maybe we'll get an answer on that sooner rather than later. But Ben, good luck this season covering this team. You're doing some fantastic work so far, and we will definitely have you back on in the future to get some updates on the Young Reds. I'm gonna stick with that name because that's just how it goes, man. I hate that name.
I hate that name. We got to think of a better one. Because if I was Caleb, I'd be like, yeah, I don't want to play for this team anymore. I walk into training camp and it's just an insult. Like at this
player
point.
Coach, man, player coach. He I think he embraces all of that, but it's all right. But anyways, Ben, thank you once again for joining us, and we'll talk soon. All right.
More than happy to join whenever, and more than happy to talk some USL League too, because I think it's just such a fun league.
Awesome.
Very fun. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah,
okay.
Everything I hope for. I love getting the insight on the formerly known as Young Reds.
Some great insight there from Ben, and like I said, he's going to be on the beat all season. I'm really excited to see what he does moving forward, and he's already created some fantastic content. So
yeah, and he's already got a fan. Yeah, Benny.
Oh yeah, there you go, Benny. Yeah, it's kind of a segue. Let's talk a little bit about Jordan Perusa, who he made a cameo appearance once again, I guess, for San Antonio FC USL Championship. And what do you know? This guy comes on, 15 minutes left. He loves his debuts with San Antonio because he once again netted the game winner, making an impact, I don't know, maybe 7 minutes after he came on the pitch. A ball gets thrown in from a corner, crossed into the middle, bounces around a bit, finds Jordan Perusa's feet, and he volleys at home. You know, it wasn't the cleanest volley, but he did enough to get in the back of the net, and that ended up being the game winner. So shout out Jordan Perusa for the start he had with San Antonio, and hopefully that does wonders for his confidence, because I think he really is a potential first team stud for Toronto FC. I mean, he's done it at every level so far, except for the MLS and Major League Soccer. He obviously still has a lot of growing to do, especially when you consider the people that are in front of him in terms of strikers. But he has all the tools and all the potential. So excited to see him get off the mark there once again. And as I mentioned, it's a shorter loan, so we will see him back sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Now, I mean, Tsubasa tore up USL too. You know what I mean?
And that did wonders for his confidence, because
it sure did. It sure did.
Came back from that.
Absolutely.
He went on to start the MLS Cup final. He went on
Scored
such a run
goals
where he
in the
was
playoffs
super
too.
important to Greg Vanney. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe that does a similar effect to Jordan Perusa. Keep an eye out for that. Now, kind of a segue, and we're talking about TFC strikers. One of the biggest question marks right now, if Chris Armas does want to start one striker up top, is, do you go with Josie Altidore or do you go with Iowa Canola? Jeff, I'll pose that question to you.
I mean, we talked about this on the post game. I think we're in agreement. I start Io. If all things being equal, I want Io to get into rhythm and Josie to be comfortable with his role as a super sub that can score clutch goals. And I'm not eliminating that, a couple, maybe a month of rolling with Io as the starter and Josie coming on to just inject fire into the team doesn't result in them switching around. That's the wonder of having these two guys on our roster. But for right now, it's Io. It's 100% Io.
Yeah, I mean, he's 21 years old. I think when Josie Altidore is on his game, I think he is the better striker.
1,000,000%.
It's just we haven't seen Josie Altidore on his game enough. There's one time we saw him on his game really this season, and that was when he came on as a substitute.
Yeah,
against Columbus, right? And then he obviously rang that screamer off the crossbar, and then he ended up finishing there in the cross or whatever from Omar Gonzalez. So, it's an interesting debate because if you were to sort of remove the price tags from everyone, remove the designated player status, remove everything of that, and you just look at the player on the field and what they bring, it's tough to not consider Josie Altidore as a super sub moving forward.
I don't want to call out a new fan because I've not, but but at the end of the day, Ilsino is a DP and he's a super sub. I agree in principle. All things being equal, you don't want your highest paid players on the team to be riding the pine until the 65th minute. The league is, Olivier Giroud, I'll always go back, like he is my definition of a luxury player, right? Like Chelsea can afford to have this guy ride the pine and play him once every 5th or 6th game. So, MLS isn't there yet, but that's kind like if we were following along a defined path, that's where we're going. So,
let me pose it this way. Way.
Please do. I'm getting lost.
Josie Altidore is re-signing a contract today. Does he sign as a designated player?
Well, I don't think he signs in MLS. I think he goes to China.
Okay. Hypothetically, don't ruin it, man. Don't ruin it.
Sorry.
Okay, hypothetically, if he's re-signing in Major League Soccer today, is Josie Altidore a designated player?
Am I the GM? Because I wouldn't, based upon the last 3 years, no chance.
I don't think there's many GMs in Major League Soccer in general. Maybe a team that doesn't use their designated player spot, throw him a DP contract because of what he brings off the field.
Yeah, but then you're in the conundrum that they could never afford him, right? So,
but I think if TFC were re-signing a designated player this season, and Josie Altidore's contract was up, Josie Altidore doesn't get that third designated player spot. No way, because you look at TFC's other designated players, Alejandro Pozuelo, the league's MVP, Jefferson Sotaldo, we talked about what he can do already on this show.
Mm-hmm.
We're not writing Josie Altidore off at all.
No, but we listen to a lot, or we read a lot of Josie hate on the most recent WTR comment threads, right? Just reactionary, knee jerk, like what's up with this guy? Shoot him into the sun, kind of nonsense. So when you bring TFC into the equation, you have to factor that in, right? So he's not a DP again, absolutely. But if you take TFC out of the equation, it's the catch-22. Sure, the Colorado Rapids would love to have Josie as a DP, but the Colorado Rapids are not paying any player those kind of wages ever. So, again, the example's right there. Josie's next deal, I hate to burst your bubble, but Josie's next deal is in one of those markets where they overpay for luxury players. So we're talking the Middle East and we're talking China right now in the current soccer landscape.
Potentially depends on where he wants to go and if he is looking for money and whatnot, because you never know what his motivation is.
You never know.
Money, right?
This is wild speculation, but MLS is going to become a league, I hope, where the DP tag disappears and then we can start talking about luxury players, and there's nothing wrong with being a luxury player. I love Olivier Giroud. I wish he played for us as our third DP. But we ain't there yet. So,
and I think that's also, TFC obviously haven't done the greatest this year. They're 1 win, 2 losses, 3 draws, or something like that. Maybe 3 losses, 2 draws. I don't know which one it is right now. 5 points, I know that. But it's also, I think this team, even without Josie Altidore as a third designated player, is a very good team.
Absolutely.
It's almost a luxury right now where TFC's carrying that third designated player as not really a designated player. But just imagine if they had a designated player in that place. That's where the frustration stems from, because right now he's not living up to that designated player tag. Sure. Whether or not he should start over Ayo Akinola is a little bit of a different conversation. Me personally, I think it's probably more worthwhile to invest in Ayo Akinola, get him going, because he is someone who could turn TFC a profit. TFC.
I got a real left field question right now.
Yeah.
Would you take 2021 Josie or 2019 PT Martinez?
That's really left field.
No, because PT Martinez was just parading around the midfield with his shoulders down, his body language was terrifying, and they paid so much for the player, the former South American Player of the Year. They are absolutely new cap. And he wasn't injured, so they had to start the guy. And when they benched him, it was a big deal. It's a worthwhile question, right? I mean, that guy objectively made Atlanta United worse whenever he was on the field. And so,
yeah, I mean, yeah, I think they're two kind of different players.
Sure. I mean, one's a midfielder and
yeah, exactly. So it's kind of
hard. But they're both DPs, right? And we're having this conversation about the DP tag, which changes everything.
Well, so. I'd probably take Josie Altidore. I mean,
me too.
PT Martinez is a good player, but I'd rather take Josie Altidore just because TFC's need right now is scoring goals, and I think Josie Altidore is just the better goal scorer.
Absolutely.
Ivan makes a great point there, is that none of them have got the real service so far. TFC haven't played a real number 10 there in that spot to sort of, filter everything through and spray balls through. And that's where Alejandro Pozuelo comes into play. So I think we can roll the Michael Singh injury report now, Jeff.
Sweet. Just let me find it.
No worries.
There it is.
It's the Michael Singh injury report.
Okay, so I wonder what the news everybody's waiting to hear is.
What's up with Erickson Gallardo? Tell us what's going on with Erickson Gallardo.
Let's talk about a little bit of Erickson Gallardo, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
No, in all seriousness, Alejandro Pozuelo. He is finally expected to be back this weekend.
He's back, baby.
We saw today he's back in training. He's been back in training last week as well. And Chris Armas said last week that he does expect Pozuelo to return in the next week. So we finally got that definite timeline. So keep an eye out for the return of Alejandro Pozuelo. I know some people are asking in the chat about Achara and asking about no, I think it's just
that was just Achara, yeah.
No one else cares about anything else. Achara is one I'm going to get an update on this week. Keep an eye out on my Twitter, because I will ask about Achara this week, because he is finished that 6-game kind of wait there. So he is eligible to return this week. I'm not sure if he's quite there yet, but I will try and get an update for that. Same with Julian Dunn. He's under that same sort of category. Erickson Gallardo should be close.
If he's not on loan.
According to that.
Yeah.
Kind of on the downside here is that hit on Jonathan Osorio. He obviously came off holding his hamstring. I'm just going to pull up exactly what minute that is, because I think that is important context here. Osorio came off in the 55th minute.
I would have said 65th. Wow. Okay.
So he went 55 minutes. And it's been a bad run to the start of the season for Ozo. A lot of soft tissue injuries in the same area of the leg. And yeah, I don't know if it's re-injured.
Re-injured.
Yeah,
with hyphens.
re-injured. I don't know if
Yeah.
it's that, because I think it's like almost a different injury. Because before I thought it was his quad that was really giving him the problem. That's where he was icing.
Mhm.
And then it looked like he was holding the back of his leg coming off. So he was being evaluated by team doctors after the match. And Armas didn't have a clear update on Ozo. So we'll try and get one this week. But it didn't look good. It
So
didn't
frustrating.
look good.
So frustrating. I mean, this is when people start digging into press conferences that the gaffer gave, and then recycling the comment verbatim as a you know what I mean? Like there was so much about protecting Ozo, and yet he wasn't subbed out at the half, and then 10 minutes later he goes down again. That to me is bad player management. There's no way around it. I mean, even if Oso says I'm good to go, he played another 10 minutes, right? Nothing happened in those 10 minutes. So
hindsight's 2020.
Hindsight is totally 2020, and all we do here is madly speculate. That's the par for the course. But you know, God damn it!
Armas said we came into the game thinking 45 to 60 minutes.
Mm.
I mean, he was 55 when he got taken
Okay.
out. So
Okay.
It was right in that sort of category.
Right in that sweet spot for him to hobble off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, obviously, in hindsight, we can ask questions about, yes, should he have been taken off at halftime?
And that's our privilege. That's our privilege.
Exactly. I'm sure if Armas went back then and he's like, yeah, of course we would have taken off at halftime.
Of course. Of course.
But, like, who knows the injury is actually going to act up then? I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, what can you really do about that? It's a different injury, too, than what he was initially, going through.
I think it's important to remind ourselves that as frustrating as this is, and I am the #1 champion for frustration, I think it's very important to remind ourselves they didn't, there was that COVID outbreak at the outset of preseason. This is so far from an ideal situation in terms of fixture congestion, in terms of everything else. And then you add, and this is where I start having the problem. And then you add a new coach with a new system. That to me is like multiplying zeros, right? I'm not saying that there was another way to do it, but you had to expect this. Doesn't make it any less frustrating. I don't think we've seen the last of it.
I also don't think their injury situation has been as bad of late as people are making it out to be.
Nothing's as bad as people in TFC land are making it out to be. Come on, we know that.
We talk about, Dom Dwyer had hamstring tightness, and they were cautious about that, held him out of the match. That should be a small issue. He should be back. And then the Ozo, obviously, re-injury is a big one. That's probably their biggest slip-up so far, in my opinion.
Okay.
And then you have
look at
who's been out 2 months.
Our friend Thundercat, you don't need hindsight to be cautious with a player that's been injured 3 times already. But you got to play him.
Where's that
you
line
gotta play
of
him.
cautious?
I mean, if he's ready to play, you have to play him. You can be cautious all you want, and he doesn't play, right? There's a risk that any player makes, a tacit understanding that they might be injured.
Is 45 minutes cautious or 55 minutes cautious? Like, I think the TFC medical staff, they have better insight of what players.
Well, maybe.
maybe, yeah.
Maybe. I mean, I'm not reserving. I'm not pulling them out of the clown shoe category just yet. But
aside from Ozo, there hasn't been any other re-injuries for this TFC team, right? Unless I'm thinking of something else. Am I missing someone?
No. I mean, I don't know. There's been so many injuries at this point.
This is a team that's gotten Josie Altidore back on the field for the most part, right? Like they are doing something that's right. I don't think it's been as crazy as some people are making it out to be. Like their injury list,
we're judging.
I tweeted out after every match. Their injury list is short. It's getting shorter and shorter after every single match.
Yeah, I mean, my counter to that is time heals all wounds, and it has nothing to do with the medical staff. But at the end of the day, we're viewing them under the lens of a perfect situation where they're at the BMO, they've had a proper preseason, et cetera, and I think that's where we get into problems. I'm not going to say it's not frustrating, because it sure as heck is. It's unbelievably frustrating, and it leads to questions like this one, which I'm going to have to scroll way up. It's another Ivan question, which is, do you guys risk playing pause this weekend before the international break, or do you bring them back after the international break?
Okay,
it's a wonderful chess move question.
Here's what I'll say: the risk is gone there with pause. They've taken all of the precautions.
Oh my God, Mike!
That's why No, Jeff. I'll say it. That's why he's taken so long to come back. Chris Armas has said it. Paz himself has said he's ready to come back. But, they know the injury's still there. He's training without any pain, but they know the injury's still there. They had these conversations with us 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, and that they are erring on the side of caution. So if Paz is ready to actually come back on Saturday, you play him because that caution you've already taken as much caution as you need. This is an injury that no one expected him to be out for 2 months. They've taken the full 2 months for him to come back. If he's good to go, you get him out there, and it's not because I'm frustrated of not seeing Paz on the field. It's just because I believe they've taken all of the caution they need to take already.
Yeah, and even one game with Paz before the international break will have, if it goes as well as we think it does, the knock-on effect it has for everybody's confidence, I think, is worth the risk. But this is cold speculation, right? And oh my God, is Armas's feet going to be on the fire if he brings Paz back for that game and he goes down re-injured? Which leads me to what I wanted to discuss, which you don't have on a rundown, but I was sure we were going to get to it anyway, which is we are seeing a whole lot of Armas out, Manning out, Curtis out, knee-jerk things. Is it too soon or is it too late? Oh, Mike just disappeared, but now he's back.
Ooh, that was such a hot take that
because
my camera went off, man. Camera off.
I think it's too soon. I think it's way too soon. But I don't want it to be too late.
We just started to see this roster come into place. Like James Grossi was on the show talking about Greg Vanney and how he was saying it takes, sometimes 2 years for a coach to get his roster overturned to his liking, to his identity. And we're just seeing the likes of a Kamar Lawrence come into play, who we've absolutely praised here. We've seen, what's his face? Dom Dwyer come into this team, who we have absolutely praised here in his 20 minutes.
Yep.
And then we see like the likes of a Sotaldo come into the mix, who is a new player as well. Like, it takes time for a coach to get a fair run of play, because at a certain point, he's not inheriting a roster, or when he comes in, he's inheriting a roster that's not made for him.
Sure.
So, and we know about the history between Greg Vanney and Ali Curtis, about how they weren't seeing eye to eye all the time in terms of the players that they should buy. Like, there's way too soon for anybody to be calling for Armas out. Like, the start of the season, 5 points is not great, but if you look at each match except for that Red Bulls match, like, they played all right, man. Like, they weren't horrid. Now, I expect this TFC team to be a lot better, and I think the injection of Alejandro Pozuelo will help that a lot. But in terms of Armas out, Curtis out, all of that, that's way too soon. Miss me with that.
No, I agree with you. We're going to see it. We see it every loss. We saw it with Vanney every loss. We see it with a string of losses. The voices just get, those are knee-jerk hard takes. What are you going to do? But how long do we give him? I give him the season, because even if we come back in July to B mode, this is a Franken season, another Franken season. He gets the season. And there's a big part of me that thinks that this was always the plan, success or fail, because, we had a coach turnover at a very inopportune time, like a week after we crashed out of the playoffs last season. So there's a part of me that thinks that if we win, great. If we lose, whatever, this year, which is kind of horrible, because I ascribe that feeling to the front office, unfortunately. But we need to have.
If this team is not a playoff team at the end of the season, then we can start having this conversation. There's still 30, 31 more games for this team to play. Like, there's still so much more soccer. And I want everybody who's saying Armas out to keep that same energy halfway through the season, because I personally believe this thing's going to be flipped upside down. There's too much talent on this TFC roster for things to continue in this direction. We don't even have Alejandro Pozuelo back yet. We don't have the league's MVP, most valuable player, back yet.
Yeah.
And this is a new coach coming into a completely new system with new players that he's unfamiliar with. Like, it takes time. I get that. And I don't even think they played bad against Orlando. I think that's a game they should have won, but I don't think they played bad. At the end of the day, yeah, it's true. Results have to come. And like I said, if they're not a playoff team at the end of this year, have this conversation. But let's get behind our coach, guys. Let's give him some when times are rough, let's stick through them through the thick and the thin, because when
I don't think the
things
criticism
go
is
well,
unfounded. I don't. But I do think the takes for his head are a little premature. Yeah, I mean, listen, if Paz comes in and it's the same old, wow, we are not going to enjoy moderating the forums on Waking the Red. Let's just put it that way. And that, like, how much of a leash do you give TFC with Paz? Like, if they don't perform in game one right off the hop, do you still have such a sunny, rosy disposition, or are you starting to feel
I mean, there's so much factors that go, like, do they play well and not get the result? Like, there's a lot. I want to see what that plays out and how that unfolds before we get into it. I will give Pause a little bit to get kind of game shape, game ready, game fit, and all of that. But he's the league's most valuable player. He makes this team that much better.
Yep.
Listen, the question marks are there for Armis in terms of certain decision making and whatnot. We started our show by talking about how we don't believe he is getting the best out of his players and setting this team up to succeed the best that they could be. But at the end of the day, man, like, you got to give this guy time. Like,
they're playing. They're now playing in a hostile home ground. I mean, we really need to emphasize that, right? Like, that the vibe in that place is totally different following this game, right? There'll be fans in the stands for all the games. They're going to be hostile. TFC plays Orlando, and they were at whatever the capacity that was allowed by the state government. The next game where they play Columbus, there'll probably be crickets and like 2 people in there, and that affects you. It has to affect you. So their home ground is now a hostile ground. This is important. I know it's so easy to forget about all this and just go for the easy culprits, but I really do think that we have to consistently emphasize just what kind of just how hard the odds are stacked against them.
That too, yeah, it's definitely something we overlook quite often. Put the back of their mind is the conditions that this team is playing in, obviously away from home and in a completely different climate in Florida, not in their home stadium. I mean, there's a ton of factors that Armis laid out a couple weeks ago, but no excuses, man. Like that's the philosophy that this team wants to take, and that's, I think, moving forward, that's what we should kind of instill as well. Yes, we can remind ourselves at times that this is the reality of what they're going through, but this is also a team, I believe, and they showed even last season during the pandemic, that this is a team that's capable of producing results despite the conditions. So I think it's weirder this year because they're like in Florida, like someone like Ben said, COVID's over. You know what I mean? Like, the general zeitgeist in the state of Florida is that the pandemic is done and people are moving on with their lives and et cetera, et cetera. And, when these guys call their family at home, it's like an alien planet, right? Like, their day-to-day experiences is that they can do whatever the hell they want. And then they call their wives and kids and it's stress after stress. What are we going to do with the second AZ dose? Like, is my kid going to school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that we need it. We need to have that perspective. Do you know what I mean? It sucks. For sure.
It sucks.
For sure. I want to talk about Ivan's comment quickly. I think we should wrap up soon, but Ivan says Armis still hasn't coached in his home opener. And the reason why I want to bring that up is because Armis is a guy who talks about energy. He talks about intensity. He talks about passion, pressing, all of that. I think he's a guy who his team at least, when they don't have a home crowd, that affects them more than some other teams because of his values, right? So that is a point to also make, is that they don't have a home crowd when they're playing in Florida. I mean, most of the fans are Orlando City fans.
Yeah, or they just walked in by accident because they thought it was the lineup for Space Mountain.
They're not even taking fans for their home game because they don't want non-TFC fans there. So yeah, I mean, Colin saying in the chat excuses, sure. Call them excuses because
valid excuses that are
but it is the reality as well. Anyways, before we wrap up, I did want to give a quick shout out to massive week in Canadian soccer.
Mhm.
Jonathan David, of course, lifting that League One title with Lille. David
Best
scored
game in a Lille shirt, easily.
Yeah,
He was
scored
insane.
13 times in his first season in France after what was a really rough start, including some clutch goals against sides like PSG. That tally is a record number for a Canadian in top 5 European leagues. So shout out Jonathan David and what he's done. David also joins, Jesse Fleming, Milan Borjan, Scott Arfield, Chloe Lacasse, Alfonso Davies, and of course Atiba Hutchinson and Kyle Larin in terms of Canadians who won their respective leagues this season. So
damn,
quite a massive year, monumental year for Canadian soccer.
Too bad I can't buy a shirt.
Too bad you still can't buy a Canada soccer shirt, but what
unbelievable
an outstanding year for Canadian soccer. Groundbreaking. I can't even think of the right word that does all of this justice, because in my lifetime, growing up here, I didn't think I'd see something like this. At least not this early.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to do wonders for the ripple effect of Canada soccer in terms of paving the way for the next guy, for the next youngster that wants to go over. We've seen it happening already with the United States. We see it happen a bit already with Canada. And we're going to start hearing about more and more Canadians abroad. And that's the ultimate goal, is getting Canadians at the highest level, getting them on the same level as some of the European clubs. And it'll also have a ripple down effect in terms of Canada on the international stage, because they have some big games coming up. And they're going to have some big players playing in those big games. So shout out Canada soccer for what was.
It'll have a ripple effect on how high I hold myself walking around as a Canada national team fan. Right.
And there you go.
I mean, we got some swagger now. This is great. Let's turn it into trophies that we can fill our case with.
There you go. All right, guys. On that note, thank you everyone for chiming in, tuning in. You guys were very lively today in the comments.
Yeah, we really like it. Always makes for a good show.
Yeah, thank you to our producer, Sophie and Kevin. You guys do an awesome job, and thank you for bearing with us. Jeff, amazing job today. We missed Mitch, but I think
he's getting his jab today.
Yeah. He's getting his jab, so that's all right. We'll give him a pass for this one. And I think we did all right today, man. So
absolutely,
thanks for hanging in there, and thanks again for the chat. You guys make this awesome. Thank you to our listeners who listen to this after as well. Please support us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you guys listen. Like, rate, subscribe. But on that note, until next week, I guess we'll see you guys later, and let's go TFC against Columbus this Saturday. Hopefully,
when's the next TFC 2 game? Actually, I didn't download the schedule. Do you know offhand?
Offhand, I actually don't.
Okay. So everybody check Twitter. Sorry, I'm going to check Twitter in 2 seconds. So
there you go. Cheers, everybody. Until next week.
Wednesday. Someone said.